What if the downfall of an entire multi-million-dollar media empire began with something as small as a kitchen mistake? Not a dramatic royal feud, not a political scandal, not a leaked text or a mysterious lawsuit. A kitchen, a cutting board, a moment so simple, so everyday, so ordinary, that no one in the room realized they were watching a disaster unfold in real time. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But someone did. Someone watching at home. Someone who paused the screen at just the right second. Someone who asked the one question no one else dared to ask. Did Meghan Markle just violate a federal food safety rule on camera? And just like that, a 7-second clip transformed into a national conversation. A quiet buzz turned into a storm. A cooking show, crafted to rebrand, relaunch, and repair an image, did the opposite. It triggered the involvement of not one, but two of the most powerful regulatory bodies in the country, the FDA and the FSIS. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you were watching a cooking show and noticed something off, something that didn't feel right, didn't look clean, didn't seem safe, would you shrug it off, or would you pause, zoom in, and ask yourself whether what you just saw was actually allowed? That single moment of curiosity is how this entire story began. But let's step back for a second, because none of this makes sense unless we understand the stakes. Meghan Markle's Netflix cooking show, With Love, Meghan, wasn't just a show. It was a reset button, a reinvention, a carefully engineered comeback crafted with soft lighting, warm colors, rustic bowls, organic produce, slow-motion shots of honey dripping off golden spoons. It was designed to wash away the controversies. The headlines, the interviews, the leaks, the rumors, the accusations, the fractured relationships, the royal tension. This show was supposed to be safe, beautiful, controlled, a place where nothing could go wrong. But kitchens are tricky. Kitchens reveal the truth. Kitchens don't care about PR strategy. And when cameras roll for hours, hours filled with heat, steam, noise, pressure, and dozens of hands moving in and out of frame, mistakes don't hide. They slip through. Now imagine a kitchen where every movement is being recorded in 4K, where every action can be slowed down, paused, zoomed in, and analyzed by millions of viewers, where the smallest detail can become the biggest headline. Somewhere between chopping, stirring, smiling, and storytelling, something happened. Something that wasn't supposed to be captured. Something that wasn't supposed to air. Something the editors didn't catch. Something Meghan's team didn't anticipate. And something the FDA definitely didn't ignore. But before the agencies got involved, before Netflix executives began sprinting down hallways, before crisis emails started flying, before lawyers stepped in, before PR statements were drafted, before hashtags went viral, everything began with a single frame, a single freeze. It always starts small. That's the irony of scandals. They sneak in quietly, then explode loudly. Let me take you inside that moment. Picture someone at home. Maybe they're a fan of baking shows. Maybe they love lifestyle content. Maybe they were curious after seeing Meghan's name trending. They hit play. They watch the episode. They enjoy the music, the soft lighting, the cozy ambience. Everything is going smoothly. Then something strange flashes on the screen. A blur. A quick motion. Something that feels off. They rewind. Pause. Zoom. And what they see is enough to make them sit up straight. They take a screenshot. They post it online. They add a simple caption. Is this allowed? And that's when everything changes. Because the internet doesn't scroll past a question like that. The internet investigates. The internet magnifies. The internet connects dots no one even knew existed. Suddenly people with food safety training are chiming in. Former restaurant workers, chefs, hospitality inspectors, certification instructors. Even casual viewers begin comparing what they saw to their school cafeteria rules. Comments appear like wildfire. I think this is a violation. This isn't safe. Why wasn't this edited out? Isn't Netflix supposed to check this stuff? Oh no, this looks really bad. But the online comments were just the surface. Beneath that surface, something bigger was brewing. Because some viewers didn't just leave comments. They filed reports. And here's the part that will surprise most people. Food safety complaints involving televised cooking shows are rare, but absolutely possible. Federal agencies don't care if something happened in a kitchen, a restaurant, a factory, or a studio. If food is being handled and shown to the public in a way that could mislead or potentially violate safety guidelines, they can investigate. Yes, television shows can trigger federal reviews. This is where the story turns from internet chatter into legitimate concern. Because once the footage reached the FDA, the reaction wasn't mild. It wasn't casual. It wasn't a shrug. It was immediate. But here's the twist. The FDA wasn't the only one. The FSIS, the Food Safety and Inspection Service, also got involved. When those two agencies both step into the same case, something significant has happened. So what exactly did the footage show? What rule could possibly have been broken so clearly, so directly, so undeniably, that two major government agencies took action? We'll get there. But to understand the severity, we first need to understand the moment this episode hit Netflix. Because the timing couldn't have been worse. For Meghan, this show wasn't optional. It wasn't a side project. It wasn't a hobby. It was part of a larger media strategy. A multi-year plan. A partnership built on credibility, branding, and identity. And when your entire strategy hinges on a cooking show, you cannot afford a food safety scandal. Not even a tiny one. Not even an accidental one. But this wasn't tiny. This wasn't accidental. And according to insiders, this wasn't even the only problem in the episode. Before we uncover the blunder itself, before we break down the alleged violation, before we explore the internal chaos that erupted inside Netflix, we need to understand why this one moment broke the dam. Because the truth is simple, Meghan's show wasn't just about recipes. It was about image. And nothing destroys an image faster than a mistake the entire world can pause and replay in slow motion. But here's where the story gets even more unbelievable. Once federal eyes landed on the footage, the consequences moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. Faster than Netflix could control. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. By the time Netflix executives heard the first murmurs, the clip had already begun its quiet march across the internet. What started as a casual scroll on a viewer's phone became a cascade of screenshots, rewinds, zoom-ins, and heated debates in comment sections. Did she just touch that with bare hands? One viewer asked. Is that even allowed on TV? Typed another. These weren't idle complaints. They were sparks that ignited a wildfire. Inside Netflix, the atmosphere was tense. Producers, editors, and legal advisors gathered in conference rooms, replaying the segment again and again. Every pause, every angle, every shot was scrutinized. They weren't just looking at a moment. They were analyzing a potential crisis. A small, seemingly harmless misstep could now threaten contracts, partnerships, and the reputation of not only the star but the entire network. And when you're dealing with a global platform and a celebrity with international recognition, the stakes are magnified exponentially. Meanwhile, the question haunting everyone was the same. How could something so subtle, so small, have been overlooked during production? The cameras had been rolling for hours. Teams of professionals had been present at every step. Yet the mistake slipped past every set decorator, food stylist, and editor. This wasn't a simple oversight. It was a perfect storm of circumstance and timing, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Outside the studio, the audience response was immediate and explosive. Social media users began dissecting the footage with meticulous detail, frame by frame, sharing their observations and speculations. Some were appalled, some confused, and others downright alarmed. It wasn't just the moment itself that caught attention. It was the realization that a national television show, endorsed by a global streaming giant, might have violated federal standards in front of millions of viewers. The implications were staggering. Every chef, every home cook, every food blogger suddenly had an opinion and a platform to share it. What made this story even more gripping was the unusual involvement of federal agencies. The FDA, an organization known for its meticulous regulation of food safety, and the FSIS, tasked with inspection and enforcement within food processing, had reportedly both taken an interest in the footage. Rarely do television shows intersect with federal food enforcement, but here, the collision was unavoidable. The presence of these agencies implied that the blunder wasn't merely cosmetic or performative. It was potentially a legal issue, a breach serious enough to warrant investigation. And for a show crafted to repair a public image, There was no higher level of scrutiny possible. But the blunder itself is only one piece of the puzzle. Understanding its impact requires a look at the mechanics of a production, like with Love, Meghan. Behind every shot of carefully plated dishes, every perfectly lit close-up, and every smooth camera pan, there are hours of preparation, dozens of crew members, and countless opportunities for error. Editing teams work tirelessly to maintain the illusion of perfection, removing anything that might jar the viewer or disrupt the narrative. Yet, despite these layers of control, the footage in question made it through, and in doing so, exposed something the world was not prepared to see. This is where the story pivots from simple curiosity to full-blown drama. The viewers who initially noticed the mistake weren't just casual fans. They were engaged, analytical, and willing to dig deeper. Some had professional backgrounds in food safety or culinary arts. They began connecting the dots, referencing federal guidelines, and raising questions that would eventually reach the desks of agency officials. And once the regulators were aware, the pace of events accelerated. Emails, phone calls, and formal complaints followed in rapid succession, creating a chain reaction that even the most seasoned PR teams struggled to contain. Meanwhile, inside the studio, tensions escalated. Crew members whispered in corridors. Editors double-checked timelines. Legal advisors drafted contingency plans. Everyone understood that a single misstep could turn into a public relations catastrophe. And yet, the details of the blunder remained a closely guarded secret. This secrecy, combined with the growing online frenzy, created an atmosphere of suspense and uncertainty. Employees were caught between loyalty to the production and fear of being implicated in what was increasingly being described as a federal-level concern. And as anyone in the entertainment industry knows, suspense sells, but panic rarely looks good on camera. To fully grasp the magnitude of what happened, it's important to consider the role of perception in scandals. A minor mistake can be amplified into a headline, dissected in forums, and shared millions of times. Public opinion doesn't always differentiate between intent and accident, oversight and negligence. And in the age of social media, perception is often as powerful as fact. For Meghan Markle, a figure whose public persona has been meticulously curated, the stakes were uniquely high. Every tweet, every comment, every online post became a narrative tool that could either mitigate or magnify the crisis. As the clip continued to circulate, it sparked debates across multiple platforms. Food critics weighed in. Celebrity commentators analyzed her every move. Some were sympathetic, arguing that even the most careful star can make mistakes in a high-pressure filming environment. Others were scathing, suggesting that this blunder reflected deeper issues with professionalism and accountability. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Netflix faced a pivotal decision: intervene early and control the narrative, or allow the footage to speak for itself and risk further escalation. What makes this story different from typical celebrity controversies is the interplay between legality, public opinion, and corporate responsibility. Here was a situation where a seemingly innocuous kitchen misstep escalated into a multi-layered issue involving legal interpretation, regulatory oversight, media scrutiny, and global attention. Each layer intensified the next, creating a cascade effect that few could have predicted. And while fans and critics debated endlessly online, the agencies involved were already moving behind the scenes, preparing to take action that could alter the trajectory of Meghan's media career. By now, you're probably wondering what exactly was caught on camera, what triggered federal attention, and why it caused such a massive stir. We'll get there, but the timing is crucial. Context matters. Every action, every glance, every handling of food in that episode contributed to the chain of events. And as we explore the sequence of events in greater detail, you'll see that what might have seemed like a small slip is part of a much larger story, one filled with tension, drama, and consequences no one anticipated. The emotional stakes are also higher than they might appear. For those involved in the production, this was not merely a technical error. It was a moment that questioned their competence, their attention to detail, and their ability to manage high-profile content under scrutiny. For Meghan Markle, it struck at the heart of her carefully constructed public persona. The image she had worked so hard to cultivate, graceful, approachable, talented, and professional, was suddenly juxtaposed with a moment of apparent negligence, magnified for millions to witness. And yet, despite the chaos, one thing is clear. The story doesn't end with the mistake. It begins there. Because what came next, the reactions, the investigations, the fallout, transformed a simple kitchen blunder into an event with far-reaching implications. The involvement of federal agencies, the internal Netflix scramble, the social media frenzy, and the celebrity commentary all converged to create a scandal that was as complex as it was unprecedented. So here's the question we'll be exploring in this expose. How does a moment that might have seemed insignificant in the heat of filming become the catalyst for regulatory intervention, public scrutiny, and a potential career-altering scandal? And more importantly, what does this reveal about accountability, preparation, and the hidden pressures behind media production? Because at the end of the day, with Love, Meghan was supposed to be a story of inspiration, creativity, and personal growth. It was meant to charm audiences, showcase talent, and build a brand. But in a twist that no one anticipated, the very platform designed to elevate a celebrity instead exposed a vulnerability, magnified it, and set the stage for federal action that would shake the entertainment world. And as the first emails from federal agencies began to circulate, as the internal phone calls became frantic, as the online debates intensified, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no ordinary cooking show mishap. This was the beginning of a scandal that would dominate headlines, captivate audiences, and challenge perceptions of responsibility at every level. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started innocuously enough. A 7-second clip. That's all it took. 7 seconds of footage. Not even a full recipe. Not even the kind of moment anyone expected to make headlines. But in those 7 seconds, something happened that would ripple through the world of television, social media, and federal oversight. Picture it, a viewer sitting at home, remote in hand, ready to watch the latest episode of With Love, Meghan. Maybe they were a fan, maybe they were curious. Maybe they simply clicked because they wanted a quiet moment of comfort, a few minutes of cooking inspiration. The screen flickered to life. Soft music played. The lighting was perfect. Meghan smiled, spoke warmly, gestured gracefully, and began preparing a dish meant to evoke warmth, care, and sophistication. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. The viewer paused. Something caught their eye. A motion, a hand, a glance. Something that, at first, might have seemed trivial. A small movement that anyone else would have missed in the flow of the episode. But this viewer didn't miss it. They rewound, zoomed in, paused again, and then a chill ran down their spine. Something about what they were seeing didn't look right. Not just aesthetically, not just stylistically. Something about it suggested carelessness, a breach, a potential violation. And they weren't the only one. Because as the clip began circulating, others started noticing the same thing. Social media exploded. The kind of chaos that usually surrounds celebrity news, wardrobe, attitude, interviews, now revolved around a moment in a kitchen. People started asking questions. Did that just happen? Is that allowed? Can Netflix really air this? The clip was short, but the implications were massive. Inside Netflix, panic began quietly. At first, it was whispers among editors, then hushed conversations between production staff, then emergency conference calls with legal teams. The usual confidence and control of the network suddenly felt fragile. After all, they were not just producing a cooking show. They were producing a high-stakes, celebrity-driven project designed to rehabilitate and solidify Meghan Markle's image. Any slip-up was a potential PR disaster. And suddenly, there was proof, frozen frame by frozen frame, of a potential error that had made it all the way to air. Let's step back for a moment. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to grasp how these shows are made. Every shot, every angle, every movement is choreographed meticulously. Lighting is calculated, ingredients are prepped in advance, hands are cleaned, gloves may even be worn depending on the segment. Editors have the ability to fix minor mistakes, reshoot scenes, and manipulate timing. Mistakes are rare because the show is built to avoid them. And yet, somehow, despite these layers of oversight, this moment slipped through. Why? Pressure, fatigue, oversight? Perhaps all of the above. Filming a show like With Love, Meghan is grueling. Days on end. Multiple takes. Cameras capturing every nuance. crew members running around, temperature changes in the kitchen, timing that must be perfect to match the music, the dialogue, and the visual appeal. And in that environment, humans make mistakes. Even experienced professionals. Even celebrities accustomed to the spotlight. The 7-second clip wasn't just a mistake. It was a revelation. It revealed the fragility of perfection, the reality behind the polished frames of a production that millions would watch without suspicion. And it also revealed how quickly that fragility could escalate. Because what happened next was almost immediate. As the clip spread online, amateur sleuths and fans alike began analyzing every detail. They compared it to official food handling standards. They cited guidelines, regulations, and even federal rules. Every motion was scrutinized, every ingredient placement questioned, every touch, every gesture, every movement became a potential violation. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was now an educational one, a case study in what not to do when handling food on camera. And as the online buzz intensified, the clip reached the wrong, or right, people. People with authority. People who didn't scroll past social media posts. People who had the power to investigate and enforce. The moment that viewers found alarming, regulators found serious. And regulators, unlike fans, didn't just post comments. They acted. Meanwhile, inside Netflix, the realization of what was happening began to sink in. Emails pinged. Phones rang off the hook. Legal teams mobilized. Public relations strategists drafted statements. Production staff tried to trace the footage, figure out where the error occurred, and anticipate the fallout. In other words, what started as a minor observation from a single viewer had now escalated into an existential threat to the show's credibility and the network's reputation. It's also important to understand the human side of this moment. The crew members, the editors, the assistants, and even Meghan herself likely didn't recognize at first the magnitude of what was being observed. To them, it may have seemed like a minor slip, something trivial, a natural human error in a hectic production. But when seen through the lens of federal regulations and amplified by millions of online viewers, a small error became a seismic event. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The show was not yet fully released globally. Episodes were scheduled to roll out with tight deadlines. Marketing campaigns had been coordinated to peak audience engagement. Sponsorships were in place. Everything depended on a seamless launch. And now, an oversight in a single moment threatened to unravel the entire plan. The internet's reaction didn't help. Social media users, journalists, and even competitors began dissecting the 7-second clip. The discussions were intense, passionate, and unrelenting. Memes began to circulate. Hashtags trended. And in the eye of the storm, the clip became a symbol of something much bigger, a test of accountability, professionalism, and standards in a highly scrutinized environment. For the viewer who first paused the clip, it must have felt surreal. One moment of curiosity led to an entire chain of events none of them could have predicted. They were, unknowingly, the spark that ignited a wildfire. And that wildfire didn't just threaten a show. It threatened an entire brand, a carefully curated public persona, and potentially the professional reputation of everyone involved. But what really escalated the situation from viral curiosity to federal scrutiny was the meticulous way the clip was documented, preserved, and shared. Screenshots, slowed footage, and repeated replays created an irrefutable record. Unlike casual gossip or hearsay, this evidence was clear, concrete, and verifiable. For regulators trained to analyze risk and compliance, this was exactly the kind of material that demanded attention. And so, what began as a quiet observation from a single viewer became a multi-layered crisis involving public perception, corporate responsibility, and government oversight. A 7-second clip that might have been forgotten under normal circumstances became a turning point. It was the moment where everything changed. Because this wasn't just about a small mistake in a kitchen. This was about accountability, responsibility, and the undeniable fact that in a world where millions are watching, even a seemingly minor error can escalate into a headline-making, career-impacting scandal. And as the first regulatory emails began circulating inside Netflix, as phones buzzed and conference calls multiplied, as social media debates reached fever pitch, one thing became clear. Nothing about this incident would ever be the same. The day the footage slipped out wasn't just the start of a story. It was the beginning of a crisis that would escalate far beyond anyone's expectations. And what came next? That's where the real story begins, and no one saw it coming. Inside the production offices, the atmosphere was electric, tense, and tinged with panic. Editors hunched over their monitors, rewinding and slowing the footage frame by frame. "How did this get past us?" muttered one assistant, glancing nervously at his supervisor. Phones were ringing nonstop. Legal advisors typed furiously, drafting contingency strategies while simultaneously trying to assess potential exposure. For Netflix, this was no longer a simple content review. It was a full-blown crisis. The initial discovery by a viewer had set off a chain reaction that no one could contain. The clip had gone viral almost instantly. People were dissecting it in ways the production team never intended. Slow-motion replays, zoom-ins, and frame-by-frame analysis revealed details that had previously gone unnoticed. And the internet, hungry for drama, quickly connected the dots. Every small oversight was magnified, every potential misstep became a headline, and every gesture was open to scrutiny. For Meghan Markle, this must have been surreal. Here she was, performing as planned, doing what millions of viewers expected, cooking, smiling, sharing a piece of herself on screen. Yet, unbeknownst to her at the time, a single moment had begun to unravel the meticulously constructed image of elegance, professionalism, and control. A small lapse, a fleeting action that might have gone unnoticed in the studio, was now under the microscope of the world. And then came the emails. The first ones were internal. Netflix legal teams contacting producers. Notes from PR strategists outlining potential fallout. Calls between department heads, asking the same question over and over. How could something like this slip through every layer of oversight? There were production notes, safety checklists, multiple reviews, all intended to prevent exactly this kind of embarrassment. Yet, the 7-second clip had bypassed every safeguard. Next came the external inquiries. One viewer's concern quickly turned into a broader conversation when professional chefs and food safety experts weighed in online. Discussions began circulating in forums, on Twitter threads, and across professional groups. Some offered critiques, others expressed disbelief. The more the clip was analyzed, the more alarming it appeared. Even people with casual culinary experience could see the potential issue. And soon, the conversation reached an entirely new level: regulatory scrutiny. Because it didn't take long for authorities to notice. The FDA and FSIS, both agencies tasked with monitoring and enforcing food safety standards, became aware of the situation. While it's uncommon for a television show to trigger federal oversight, this particular case checked enough boxes to warrant investigation. The mishandling, or perceived mishandling, of food in a public, televised setting represented a potential violation, and in the eyes of regulators, the risk could not be ignored. Meanwhile, the social media frenzy continued to escalate. Memes, hashtags, and posts circulated at lightning speed. People debated the severity of the blunder. Journalists started reporting on it. Industry insiders shared cryptic warnings about production oversight. The story was no longer confined to a small circle of viewers. It had reached a critical mass, attracting attention from multiple angles simultaneously: fans, critics, journalists, and regulators. Inside Netflix, the situation was chaotic. Senior executives convened emergency meetings, trying to understand the full extent of the issue. The production team scrambled to trace the exact moment the footage had been captured and identify whether any edits could mitigate the fallout. Public relations strategists began drafting statements designed to minimize damage without revealing too much. Every move had to be calculated because, in the age of viral content, even a small misstep could snowball into an international controversy. And yet, even as the executives moved quickly, the clip itself was unstoppable. It had been shared, downloaded, and analyzed far beyond the company's control. Each replay reinforced the perception of error, magnifying the severity of the situation. And while Netflix scrambled internally, viewers continued to dissect every detail, with many comparing what they saw to established federal guidelines for food handling. This is where the story's complexity begins to surface. A single moment of oversight had transformed into a multifaceted crisis involving multiple stakeholders, a global streaming platform, an internationally recognized celebrity, millions of viewers, and federal agencies. The initial discovery, a seemingly trivial 7-second clip, had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. It highlighted how vulnerable even the most controlled environments can be when human error intersects with public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. The reactions of the production staff added another layer of tension. Some blamed the editors. Some blamed the crew. Some blamed the star herself. The arguments were tense, whispered, and sometimes explosive. Everyone wanted someone to take responsibility, yet no one could pinpoint exactly where the chain of mistakes began. And with every passing hour, the stakes grew higher. The social media storm was relentless, and the first regulatory inquiries were already underway. At the same time, the story was unfolding in real time for the viewers. People who had initially spotted the clip were sharing their analysis, creating timelines, and posting side-by-side comparisons. Some questioned why Netflix hadn't caught the error. Others speculated about the implications for food safety. As more eyes examined the footage, the perception of negligence grew. What might have been dismissed as an isolated incident now looked like a systemic failure, and the pressure mounted on everyone involved. For Meghan Markle, the realization of what was happening must have been staggering. A show intended to showcase her personality, skills, and brand was now being defined by a single, controversial moment. The emotional stakes were high, the scrutiny intense, and the potential consequences, legal, professional, and reputational, loomed over every aspect of the production. Yet even in the midst of this chaos, the show itself continued to air. Episodes rolled out according to schedule, unaware of the growing storm. And that juxtaposition, normalcy on screen versus panic behind the scenes, added a surreal quality to the entire affair. The contrast between perception and reality was stark. The public saw warmth, charm, and elegance. The production team lived fear, tension, and uncertainty. And as the first regulatory emails began circulating, as phone calls multiplied, and as social media debates reached fever pitch, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary mistake. It wasn't simply an oversight or a minor error. It was the start of a chain reaction that would redefine the show, the network, and the celebrity involved. The day the footage slipped out wasn't just a day of discovery. It was the day the crisis began, a turning point that would escalate in ways no one could predict. But what came next would push this story from viral curiosity to federal scrutiny, and it was a move that no one inside the studio could have anticipated. Have you ever wondered what it really takes to make a celebrity cooking show? Not the Instagram-perfect shots, not the cozy voiceovers, not the gentle smiles for the camera. I mean the chaos behind the cameras. The sweat, the pressure, the tiny mistakes that could ruin hours of production in a single second. For with love, Meghan, that chaos was closer than anyone anticipated. It begins with the set itself. The kitchen wasn't just a kitchen. It was a carefully designed stage, meticulously constructed to evoke warmth, sophistication, and authenticity. Every countertop, every utensil, every bowl and plate was placed to ensure that the camera captured a flawless aesthetic. Lighting rigs stretched overhead, casting soft glows that made ingredients pop. Multiple cameras recorded every angle simultaneously, close-ups for chopping, overheads for stirring, side angles for dialogue. It was like orchestrating a ballet, except the dancers were chefs, assistants, camera operators, and one internationally recognized celebrity. And while the visuals were perfect, the reality behind the scenes was far less glamorous. Hours before the cameras rolled, production staff worked tirelessly to prep ingredients. Fruits and vegetables were washed, trimmed, and arranged. Meat and poultry were carefully portioned, and every spice was measured and labeled. Timing was everything. The sequence of shots had to match the pacing of the music, the narrative flow, and the dialogue. If a single step went wrong, editors would have to reshoot, costing time, money, and energy. Now, imagine this high-pressure environment with Meghan Markle at the center. She was expected to perform perfectly, to appear effortlessly charming, to engage the audience authentically, and to execute recipes with precision. That's a lot of pressure, even for someone used to public scrutiny. One slight slip of a knife, One momentary lapse in attention or one small breach in kitchen protocol could have huge consequences. And in this particular production, the consequences didn't stay hidden. The incident that sparked the FDA and FSIS involvement occurred during a particularly busy filming day. Multiple dishes were being prepared simultaneously. Cameras were rolling from multiple angles. Crew members rushed back and forth, ensuring that lighting, sound, and props were perfect. In the midst of this orchestrated chaos, a small misstep happened, an action so minor that, on any other day, it might have gone unnoticed. But in this case, the camera captured every second, every movement, every detail, and once it hit social media, nothing could hide it. Consider the human factor. Even the most experienced chefs can make mistakes under pressure. Add in a celebrity who is also balancing the expectation to charm, explain, and demonstrate, and the margin for error becomes razor thin. In a controlled, professional environment, mistakes are usually corrected immediately or edited out. But in the case of With Love, Meghan, that single lapse made it through multiple layers of oversight and into the final cut. And it wasn't just the action itself, it was the context. The timing, the angle, and the visibility of the act all contributed to its significance. Something that might have been brushed off in a private cooking class became magnified when broadcast to millions. The optics were everything, and for regulators, optics mattered. It wasn't just about the act. It was about the potential perception of negligence and disregard for food safety. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Production staff reported that the day in question had been unusually hectic. Reshoots were required for other segments. Equipment malfunctioned. Timing was tight. The pressure to meet deadlines was intense. And in that environment, even highly trained professionals can make choices they wouldn't normally make. It's also important to note the role of editing in this story. Editors typically serve as the final line of defense, catching mistakes, correcting continuity errors, and ensuring the overall polish of the show. Yet, for reasons that remain unclear, the blunder slipped through. Perhaps it was overlooked in the rush to meet deadlines. Perhaps it was misjudged as inconsequential. Or perhaps it was a simple human error. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. The clip made it to air, setting off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, the cast and crew were unaware of the growing storm outside the studio. Social media had begun dissecting the footage. Amateur analysts, fans, and industry insiders were already speculating about the potential implications. And in the quiet corners of the internet, discussions about regulatory compliance and possible legal consequences began to emerge. Inside the studio, however, the focus remained on filming. Meghan continued to perform, smiling for the camera, explaining techniques, and interacting with crew members. The illusion of calm and professionalism was maintained on screen, even as the first signs of trouble began to ripple across the digital landscape. And that's the irony. The very show designed to present control, grace, and competence was simultaneously revealing vulnerability, error, and oversight. The polished exterior masked the reality behind the cameras, a reality that regulators, viewers, and eventually the media would scrutinize relentlessly. By the end of that filming day, several things were clear. First, a minor incident had been captured on camera in a way that could not be undone. Second, the clip had potential legal and regulatory implications. Third, social media had begun to amplify what had occurred, magnifying its significance far beyond the studio walls. And fourth, everyone involved, from Meghan to Netflix executives to production staff, would soon have to face the consequences of that single, unassuming moment. But what made this moment even more explosive wasn't just the filming environment or the minor mistake itself. It was the fact that it had the power to trigger two of the most important food regulatory agencies in the United States. The FDA and FSIS don't intervene lightly. They are meticulous, cautious, and methodical. Yet this incident drew their attention, and when the regulators got involved, the stakes jumped from internal embarrassment to federal scrutiny, a shift that would escalate faster than anyone anticipated. And as the cameras continued to roll, as the crew continued to hustle, and as Meghan continued to smile for the audience, the unseen storm was quietly gathering strength. The next few days would prove pivotal, marking the moment when a 7-second clip would transform a celebrity cooking show into an unprecedented regulatory and public relations crisis. But what came next? The reaction from Netflix, the legal scramble, and the first federal communications would push this story into territory no one inside the studio could have imagined. The day after filming, the atmosphere inside Netflix shifted. What had seemed like a routine wrap-up of production suddenly became urgent. Executives, producers, and legal teams convened in a series of high-stakes meetings that stretched late into the evening. The 7-second clip, the one casual viewers had paused, zoomed, and debated, had now taken on a life of its own. Emails were flying. Phone calls were nonstop. The word crisis began to be whispered in corridors where normally only deadline and budget were uttered. The clip in question depicted something subtle but unmistakable, a brief, unintended moment of improper food handling. It wasn't overtly malicious or careless in the traditional sense, but in the eyes of regulators and food safety experts, it crossed a line. For a cooking show meant to inspire, educate, and entertain, the breach of protocol was glaring. And the worst part? It was visible, undeniable, and impossible to edit out retroactively once it had spread across social media. Social media had amplified it beyond imagination. A single observer's curiosity had triggered a chain reaction that reached millions within hours. The clip was analyzed over and over, with slow-motion replays, zoomed-in screenshots, and commentary from self-proclaimed experts. Chefs, culinary instructors, food safety professionals, and even casual viewers began weighing in. The consensus grew. What appeared minor on screen might have serious implications in real-world food safety terms. Inside Netflix, panic set in for several reasons. First, the production team had prided itself on meticulous preparation. Every ingredient, utensil, and surface had been cleaned, measured, and staged according to strict protocols. How had this moment slipped through? Second, the public response was swift and unforgiving. Comments ranged from casual oops moments to accusations of negligence. And third, and perhaps most alarmingly, regulators had now taken notice. The involvement of both the FDA and FSIS was unprecedented for a streaming show like this. Typically, these agencies intervene in cases involving restaurants, food processing facilities, or public contamination. Television shows, even those depicting food preparation, rarely trigger federal scrutiny. Yet the clip, amplified and dissected by millions, created a situation that caught the attention of professionals trained to spot risk. According to insiders, the initial communication from federal agencies was cautious but firm. There were inquiries, requests for clarification, and, in some cases, preliminary investigations. Netflix's legal and compliance teams scrambled to respond, trying to understand the nature of the concern while containing any further public spread. The urgency was clear. Any delay or misstep in addressing regulatory attention could transform a minor blunder into a full-blown legal and reputational disaster. Meanwhile, within the production studio, the emotional tension was palpable. Editors replayed the footage repeatedly, dissecting every second to determine how the lapse had occurred. Production assistants debated over whether to attribute the error to rushed filming, miscommunication, or a momentary oversight by the host herself. No one wanted to assign blame, yet everyone knew that accountability needed to be established quickly. For Meghan Markle, this was a particularly delicate situation. She had built a career and public image on poise, professionalism, and charm. A minor lapse in a single episode could undermine that carefully cultivated persona. Yet she also had to maintain composure in front of cameras and during interviews while the behind-the-scenes storm quietly escalated. The irony was sharp. The show intended to elevate her brand was simultaneously exposing vulnerability, error, and scrutiny. And then came the first calls from Netflix executives. The message was clear: contain the story, address the regulatory concerns, and prepare for potential media fallout. Legal teams outlined steps to respond, PR strategists drafted talking points, and production managers began reviewing internal protocols to ensure no further incidents occurred. Every move needed to be precise. One misstep could amplify the situation beyond repair. But the online discussion continued to grow. Tweets, Posts and video breakdowns reached audiences far beyond Netflix's immediate control. Each repost, each screenshot, and each commentary added to the mounting pressure. What might have been a minor oversight became a viral case study, dissected and debated by experts and laypeople alike. Social media had effectively become a magnifying glass, focusing intense scrutiny on a single moment. The situation highlighted a key truth about modern media. In an era of viral content, even the smallest slip can have massive consequences. A single second of footage can transform perception, trigger regulatory scrutiny, and shift public opinion in ways that are nearly impossible to control. What was once a meticulously staged cooking show now teetered on the edge of a full-blown scandal. Inside Netflix, the realization was dawning that this was more than a minor hiccup. It was a potential turning point. Production teams adjusted schedules. Legal and compliance teams coordinated responses. Public relations teams prepared messaging strategies. The network's executives recognized that the way they handled this incident would have long-term implications for both the show and the brand. And yet, despite all the behind-the-scenes activity, the viewers remained oblivious to the full scope of the unfolding crisis. They saw only the polished footage, the smiling host, and the beautifully plated dishes. The contrast between the calm on screen and the chaos behind the cameras was stark, and that gap between perception and reality would become one of the defining elements of this scandal. As the first official regulatory communications were logged, the stakes escalated further. The FDA and FSIS weren't merely sending casual inquiries. They were signaling that this moment warranted attention and review. For Netflix, this was the moment when a minor blunder transformed into a regulatory challenge. And for Meghan Markle, it was the first time that a single, fleeting action in front of millions of viewers had the potential to reshape her public narrative. And just when the production team thought they had assessed the situation fully, another complication emerged: leaks. Social media posts, insider tips, and early news alerts began circulating details of the incident. The story was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Journalists, bloggers, and influencers were weighing in, adding analysis, speculation, and sometimes exaggeration. The 7-second clip that started it all had become a public relations nightmare, amplified beyond any control mechanism Netflix had in place. And as the day ended, one truth became undeniably clear: the crisis was just beginning. What happened in that kitchen was no longer isolated. It was now public, viral, and regulatory in nature. And the next move, whether from Netflix, Meghan, or the agencies involved, would determine just how far this storm could spread. But what came next would push this scandal into unprecedented territory, a move that no one in the studio, and perhaps not even the regulators, could have foreseen. By the next morning, what had started as a subtle, almost invisible misstep in the kitchen had grown into a storm that no one could ignore. Netflix executives arrived at the studio to a flurry of notifications, emails, and urgent messages. The 7-second clip, initially noticed by a single attentive viewer, had now permeated every corner of the internet. Screenshots, slow-motion videos, and commentary dissecting the smallest movements filled social media platforms. Every post seemed to amplify the problem, turning what might have been a minor mistake into a narrative of potential negligence. Legal teams were already in full swing, examining federal guidelines and regulations to determine the implications. They pored over FDA protocols, FSIS standards, and internal compliance manuals, seeking to assess whether the clip truly constituted a violation or merely a perceived one. The difference was subtle but critical. In cases like this, perception could be just as damaging as fact. A misstep, even if technically allowable, could be interpreted by regulators and the public as a serious breach. Inside the production office, tension was palpable. Crew members whispered nervously, unsure who might be blamed or how far the investigation would extend. Editors re-examined every cut, hoping to understand how the footage had slipped through quality checks. The reality was clear: every precaution had been taken, every guideline followed. Or at least, that's what the team believed. Yet, somehow, the moment in question had made it into the final episode, exposed for millions of viewers and now under federal scrutiny. Meanwhile, social media wasn't just commenting, it was shaping the narrative. Influencers, bloggers, and fans began comparing the incident to similar cooking shows, highlighting differences in food safety protocols and questioning Netflix's oversight. Online forums buzzed with speculation about what the clip might mean for Meghan Markle personally, for the show professionally, and for Netflix as a platform. The speed of information and misinformation was staggering. And then came the first official word from regulators. According to insider reports, both the FDA and FSIS sent formal communications requesting information. The agencies didn't yet issue penalties, but their inquiries made it clear that the incident warranted attention. Netflix's compliance teams were tasked with providing documentation, clarifying production protocols, and explaining how the show ensured adherence to food safety standards. Every response had to be carefully crafted. Miscommunication could escalate the situation dramatically. The stakes were higher than ever. For Meghan Markle, the pressure was twofold: perform flawlessly on camera while simultaneously managing the perception of professionalism in a situation beyond her immediate control. The show, intended to highlight her creativity and charm, was now under a microscope. One misinterpreted action could alter public opinion, fuel social media debates, and potentially influence regulatory decisions. The internal scramble at Netflix intensified. Conference rooms were packed with executives and legal advisors. The production team reviewed every scene to determine the origin of the misstep. Public relations strategists worked on messaging designed to minimize damage without drawing further attention. Editors and crew members debated whether the incident could have been edited out or corrected post-production, ultimately realizing the clip had already been seen and shared too widely to contain. And the social media storm continued to grow. Each share, comment, and analysis amplified the moment, creating an echo chamber of scrutiny and speculation. Memes and videos dissected the incident, often exaggerating the perceived severity. Some commentary was sympathetic, noting the high-pressure environment and human error. Others were critical, highlighting the potential breach of food safety norms and questioning the professionalism of both the host and the production team. The contrast between the on-screen calm and behind-the-scenes chaos was stark. While viewers saw a polished, confident, and composed Meghan Markle preparing dishes, the production office was a whirlwind of panic, debate, and strategic planning. Editors replayed the clip repeatedly, legal teams debated interpretations, and executives considered all possible consequences. Every minute counted, every decision mattered. Adding to the pressure, news outlets began catching wind of the story. Early reports hinted at regulatory attention without revealing full details, creating a suspenseful narrative that piqued public curiosity. The media coverage, fueled by social media speculation, transformed the incident from an internal production issue into a public relations crisis. Netflix, Meghan Markle, and the entire production team were now navigating an increasingly complex landscape, balancing legal obligations, audience perception, and brand reputation. Even small details became significant. Crew members questioned lighting angles, camera angles, and timing, trying to determine if technical factors contributed to the misstep. Legal advisors scrutinized each procedural step, noting how production protocols might be improved or documented to prevent future issues. Public relations teams rehearsed responses, preparing for questions from journalists, regulators, and the public. Every angle, every detail, every word mattered. The situation also underscored a harsh reality of celebrity culture and media scrutiny. The smallest actions, when amplified, can have enormous consequences. What might have been a fleeting error in a controlled environment became the catalyst for widespread public discussion, regulatory inquiry, and potential career implications. A moment that passed unnoticed in real time was now magnified, repeated, and analyzed globally. And as the first official communications from federal regulators landed in Netflix inboxes, the realization settled in. This wasn't just about public perception anymore. This was about accountability, compliance, and legal oversight. Every step the network took in response would be scrutinized. Every communication, every clarification, every corrective action had to be precise and defensible. But just when the production team thought they had assessed the situation, another twist emerged. Early leaks, anonymous posts, insider tips, and social media speculation began surfacing details about the incident. Suddenly, the story was no longer confined to internal channels or official communications. Journalists, influencers, and the curious public were now active participants, shaping the narrative in real time. And as the day drew to a close, one undeniable truth emerged: the crisis was far from over. The small misstep in the kitchen had grown into a multi-layered storm involving regulators, social media, internal chaos, and media speculation. And the next move, from Netflix, from Meghan, or from regulators, would determine how far the storm could spread. But what came next would take the situation from a behind-the-scenes scramble to an international scandal, one that would leave viewers, regulators, and the production team completely blindsided. It didn't take long for the incident to escape the confines of Netflix internal channels and explode across social media. Within hours of the clip's surfacing, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook were flooded with posts dissecting the exact moment of the alleged hygiene breach. Users paused, rewound, and zoomed in. Frame-by-frame analysis became the norm. What had been a fleeting, almost invisible moment in a kitchen now felt monumental. The speed at which it spread was unprecedented. Every new post seemed to spark another wave of reactions. Hashtags emerged almost instantly. Hashtag Meghan mistake, hashtag kitchen blunder, hashtag with love fail. Viral threads dissected every detail. Some argued it was a simple human error, while others claimed it demonstrated negligence so severe that it warranted regulatory investigation. Influencers, bloggers, and amateur food safety experts joined the conversation, adding layers of opinion, speculation, and often hyperbole. Memes began to flood the internet. A clip showing Meghan's moment of misstep was edited into humorous, sarcastic, and sometimes shocking formats. Some compared it to historic kitchen fails, while others juxtaposed it against scenes of professional chefs. The virality wasn't just about comedy. It was about outrage, disbelief, and curiosity. Social media had effectively magnified the incident 1,000-fold, turning a 7-second lapse into a cultural talking point. But beyond memes and commentary, the public debate became highly polarized. Some fans defended Meghan, emphasizing the pressures of filming, the high-stress environment, and the human element of error. Others attacked the production, claiming that Netflix had failed in its duty to ensure proper hygiene and standards. The discussion became a proxy for broader conversations about celebrity accountability, corporate responsibility, and food safety in media. Journalists and news outlets quickly picked up on the trend. The viral clip became a headline-generating phenomenon. Articles, opinion pieces, and news reports speculated on the severity of the incident, its potential regulatory implications, and what it meant for Meghan Markle's brand. The story spread beyond entertainment media into mainstream news, raising the stakes for Netflix and its star. Meanwhile, the online frenzy didn't remain confined to criticism. Conspiracy theories emerged. Some claimed the incident was staged to create buzz. Others suggested it was a symbol of negligence by Netflix or a sign that production standards were slipping. These narratives, often exaggerated, amplified the pressure, creating a feedback loop where social media speculation influenced media coverage and media coverage fueled social media outrage. Within Netflix, the social media storm was as alarming as it was uncontrollable. Legal and PR teams monitored every post, every comment, and every article. Crisis meetings were held constantly to evaluate messaging, anticipate public reaction, and prepare for regulatory queries. The challenge was immense: contain the narrative, mitigate reputational damage, and respond to federal oversight, all while a global audience dissected every minute of the footage. The clip's virality also highlighted a chilling reality about modern celebrity culture. Perfection is expected, and scrutiny is instantaneous. In the past, mistakes might have been noticed by a small audience and quickly forgotten. Now, a single, fleeting error can dominate social media for days, with each share and repost amplifying the impact exponentially. For public figures, this means every action, no matter how minor, is potentially subject to worldwide judgment. And the public outrage didn't stop at commentary. Consumers began demanding accountability. Some called for Netflix to issue formal apologies. Others questioned whether the show should continue airing. The combination of public pressure, social media amplification, and regulatory attention created a perfect storm that Netflix had never faced in quite this way. The reaction from celebrity watchers was intense. Fans of Meghan Markle were divided, some defending her actions, some expressing disappointment. Critics used the moment to question her professionalism, judgment, and the authenticity of her, with love, Meghan persona. The 7-second clip had become a cultural flashpoint. A small, overlooked error transformed into a global controversy. And the longer the clip circulated, the greater the pressure grew on Netflix. Internal staff scrambled to draft responses, issue clarifications, and contain the spread. But the reality was daunting. In the age of virality, containment is nearly impossible. Once the clip was out, the narrative had a life of its own. Each comment, repost, or article added fuel to the fire. What made it even more dramatic was timing. The show had been rolling out episodes strategically, with careful marketing campaigns and prearranged promotional schedules. Suddenly, that strategy was disrupted. The 7-second clip had diverted attention away from the show's intended messaging, replacing it with outrage, speculation, and questions about hygiene compliance. Every carefully planned launch now faced an unpredictable backlash.